Our peaceful Midwestern home was invaded by she in December 1999. I thought it was time for dinner when my father shouted for me from below. With his hand raised to try to prevent me from descending, he stood at the bottom of the stairs. I knew something wasn't right when I noticed the fear in his eyes. Pay close attention to what I have to say. "Oh," he said. As he went on, my heart began to race. "It's critical that you continue to watch me. You'll see that our house has a new resident. However, you have to ignore her as much as you can." I nearly burst out laughing. My 12-year-old assumed this was some kind of out-of-character joke and tried to understand what he was saying. He went on before I could reply. "To grab your attention, she will follow you, whisper things, and do anything else she can. Son, you have to avoid interacting with her at all costs. It will be quite challenging. She will go, I swear, but only if you act as though she isn't there and make an effort to stop thinking about her. Make me a promise." I wanted to ask him a lot of questions, but I was too scared and perplexed. I was able to say, "Okay, Dad." End quote. Alleged son of the depressed. An exploration of interpersonal health issues and mental health challenges. Our friends in Okies believe the reason why depression and emotional strife. All right, come down. Dinner is about to start. Hurry, simply by telling you I've strengthened her. But I couldn't afford for you to accidentally glance at her. So I had to. Believe me. Now maintain your focus. He let out a bark. Following instructions, I slipped down the stairs gently while maintaining eye contact with my father as he stomped back into the kitchen. By the time I got to the first floor, the temperature had dropped considerably. The air had a familiar, foul, and nauseating stench to it. It brought up memories of the time a raccoon died in our wall and caused a week-long stench in the house. My sister sat across from me at the table, her head drooping and her eyes fixed on the empty porcelain dish before her. My father and I sat down at the table simultaneously. With swollen and tear-stained eyes, my mother took a casserole out of the oven. I continued to concentrate on my family, but I caught a glimpse of a sickly gray complexion and a fuzzy jumble of dark, matted hair out of the corner of my eye. The warmth and laughter that typically accompanied our dinners had been sapped from the kitchen, leaving it devoid of vitality. "Can you see her too?" my sister said, as she took hold of my knee beneath the table. I gave a nod. "Stop talking," my dad gave a hiss. The woman's footsteps were moist and cracking as she moved forward. It was a sickening odor. She slipped over to the table, paused a few inches from my sister's back, and laid a shabby hand on her shoulder. She looked at me and winced in terror. I instantly lowered my head. While serving our meal, my mother tried her best to act as though nothing was wrong. Below the glass table, I could see my father holding my sister's hand to prevent her from going totally crazy. The skeletal hand rested on my sister's shoulder during the entire meal, and the woman's almost inaudible murmurs filled the room like white noise. We tried to lead a normal life, despite the constant uninvited visitor, and that's how we spent months. She managed to track us all, even if we left the house. She might be seen standing on the side of the road, or in the rearview mirror whenever the four of us were in the car. During the months of hell, my parents never allowed us to stay at friends' houses and forbade anyone from coming to visit. If she wasn't too close, we could whisper to each other when it was absolutely important to talk about her presence. My dad made us swear not to tell anyone. She was the attention parasite, and there was no other way to isolate her. We came to the conclusion that she only infected one household at a time, and that no one outside the house could see her unless their mind had been corrupted by knowledge of her presence. A few years later, I found out that she had come because of my father. In the 1970s, his sister contracted an infection from someone else, and it spread to my aunt's house. For whatever reason, my father found it difficult to resist thinking about her in 1999. He then reintroduced her into both his and our lives. It was the most difficult thing we have ever done, but we fulfilled our pledge to keep her a secret from other people. We all attempted to leave the house together, and she came after us. We couldn't force ourselves to separate from each other. My mother found it most difficult because she was left alone with her while my father was at work and we were at school. On the day my mother broke, everything changed. After we finished dinner on a snowy February night, my mother made the decision to retire to bed early. It was quite impossible to ignore herself because she was seated on their bed. It was too much for my mom to handle. From the bedroom, I could hear her yelling for she to stop bothering us. In an attempt to stop her, my father ran upstairs. I didn't see my mother again after that. All that was left was a pool of blood on the white carpet. My mother was gone, but the woman remained. She whispered to me in the weeks that followed. She said I only needed to search and inquire as to how I may see my mother once more. I didn't. I want you to think about her, which is why I'm telling you. This morning, for the first time in 18 years, I saw her again. I can't afford to let the parasite take my wife and kids away. I want you to picture her gray skin and dark hair. To get her to leave mine, imagine her in your house. You must disregard her if you eventually discover a woman in your house, because you are already infected. It's beneficial to you. As my body slowly spun onto the road's surface, I caught a sapling. The sapling bowed under my weight as my heart thumped in my chest. I tentatively raised one foot beneath myself. One more. I was seized from behind by something. I was raised by closed hands on both arms. I laughed. I confess that I let out a scream. I also stumbled a little, attempting to bite, punch, or kick my attacker. I'm relieved that I failed at the last one. "Campground manager," a voice behind me said sharply, "today, we are not your enemies." I became quiet. The voice was familiar to me. The harvesters. Looking around, I noticed that one was holding me by each arm while the others were clustered behind me. Over their heads, I could see the tornado. We outpaced it, but it was making slow progress down the bottom of the hill. The harvesters were carrying me up the hill with them, and they were walking on the ice without any trouble. The adrenaline quickly cooled in my veins, leaving me trembling, and I sagged in relief. I questioned, "Did you come to save me?" "No. You just so happened to be ahead of us as we were leaving the dense woods." I looked over our shoulder. The tornado had left the slope behind. It remained in the dense forest. "You're running away from it," I said. The person on my right gave me a small nod of agreement. I went on, "Is everything moving out of its way?" "But this is..." One more nod. This implied that the remainder of the campsite would be home to all of these horrible creatures. My campers were no longer secure in their current location. At the top of the hill, the harvesters let me go, and after gathering my thoughts, I thanked them for their assistance. I had no intention of staying for a lengthier discussion. Even though they might be helpful and had previously assisted me, that didn't make me feel any affection for them. Even though I like the outcome of their acts, I still despise the methods they use. Unfortunately, I had to deal with the harvesters before I could go. One of them said, "We are worried." Another said, I snarled, "I'm working on the frost situation. Give me a break, this just started this morning." Liam nodded and sat back down on the bed, politely, but with a slight hurt tiss of his lip. Collectively, they shook their heads. It was not in unison, since their hive mind was not total, which made the motion a little less eerie. It's still quite eerie, though. Another person responded dismissively, "That is not for us to interfere with. It has been claimed by another." Well, it put an end to any chance of getting them to participate in another round of inhuman versus inhuman problem solving. It seemed like they were happy to leave the shepherd alone. I bluntly asked them what specifically worried them. I wasn't very interested in hearing the response. You only comply with their requests when you are confronted with a half dozen or more inhumane things that are known to casually vivisect people. However, I continue to receive campers who say, "I tried to punch the creepy, faceless, raincoat-wielding people, and now I'm down a lung, but did this go wrong?" They said that there is a gap in the campground. They were being metaphorical, but I nearly had a heart attack, thinking that maybe the dark thing had been fixed incorrectly and that the gray world had now created a mystical black hole someplace. However, I don't think their justification was much better. The old land is not a desirable place for unnatural beings. They were the kind of creatures that could live well on ancient land, but they weren't the kind to take on important roles. They stated without a shred of shame or bitterness that they were inferior beings. Like gravity is a force we accept as real, they were just what they were. This land was home to larger species. What? The Fomorian, the dark object. It's all gone now. I questioned, and what about the beast? One person retorted, it is occupied with your family line and is of no concern to us. What if it begins to show interest in the campground as a whole? There won't be anything you can do to help us when that time comes. After that, I slipped into an uncomfortable silence. I knew all too well what they meant. Only once we were exterminated will the beast become disinterested in my family. No, they were more worried about what might be drawn to this gap. After all, it was ancient land becoming ancient. For any inhuman creature, especially the stronger ones, who perceive land as ripe for conquest, it is an alluring offer. Another Fomorian or whatever might be drawn to my territory. It may draw a worse thing. My heart fell. My current efforts are insufficient. I've always understood that animals are drawn to ancient lands, and that occasionally we acquire items from the outer world. Perhaps I simply hoped that this will end at some point, that when I had murdered all that needed to be killed, the land would stabilize and I could dwell in peace until I was time to leave. Or perhaps this is what I will do for the rest of my life. Fighting every single day. End quote. They departed. I listened as the snapping of branches became less audible as I gazed back down into the dense forest. I didn't want to risk having people around until I was positive the tornado was limited to the deep woods, even if it wasn't coming up the hill. I had to persuade the campers to depart before closing for a day or longer, which required giving out refunds. I detest giving out refunds. When everyone had left, I instructed my team to place the person with the finest customer service voice at the front desk and perhaps give them a bottle of whiskey. I would be in charge of approaching each camp and requesting that individuals vacate. I had a ready reason at least. I informed them that there was a tornado watch in effect. A handful of them looked confusedly at their phones. When they saw the forecast, one of them objected. After all, they remarked angrily, the sky was clear. And then, not knowing how to respond, the safe house rain started. I clenched my teeth and added, and it was evident last night when we got this freak ice storm. It doesn't take long for the weather to drastically change in this location. I have far more faith in the local forecaster than in some nerd who only sees the world from the window of their multi-million-dollar programmer's daycare and drinks lattes and wears thin jeans. As it happens, they were programmers themselves. I'm certain that's how I received at least one of those one-star reviews. I manage a campground. Right now, I simply feel exhausted, weary, and irritated. Please understand that I will not give up. It might take all my might to keep this campground operating. I feel as though I've been doing that all along and am only now beginning to understand how difficult the effort is. I wonder if my parents were affected, but at least they had one another. I question whether that was sufficient. Why did my mother leave that window open, I wonder? I suppose I'll have to push those ideas out of my mind moving forward. Everything else has been forced out, but the frost tornado is still in the deep woods. Bo stopped by, but he's not there. I'm happy with this development. Since there are a number of irate inhumans wandering around the area where campers would be camped, I really can't have them here. I won't be able to make any money until this issue is resolved. Although this may not be the healthiest option, it is the one I am familiar with and has been successful in the past. I'm worn out. I'm annoyed. Above all, though, I'm furious. I'm upset that the harvesters don't believe I can protect my territory, that this is taking place just when I thought I was beginning to make some significant progress, and that all I've accomplished so far could be undone if a new creature invades. Now is the time to unleash your rage and give a foolish corpse tornado a fucking punch to the face, he said. That day, I was on my way home from school. Rain was threatened by the ominous clouds. I was completely chilled by the moisture of the air. I had blown my science test. Therefore, I was in a terrible attitude. Josie, my best friend and hidden crush, was also openly avoiding me throughout the day. Before she told me she needed space, we had been getting along well. You see, I already felt awful, so finding out something terrible was the last thing I wanted. Or should I say, malevolent? Something forced me to look up as my 16-year-old self was slogging up the worm-infested sidewalk, feeling sorry for myself. So I did. I stared straight at the flimsy stone brick home of the Sandersons. Mr. Sanderson was a single man. His wife had just died, and last summer their daughter Taylor, who was a year younger than me, vanished. Nobody is aware of her fate. I looked up to see a man towering in the second-story window, the bedroom of Taylor. I can tell this because I occasionally see her sitting at the window, glued to her computer. Then, like a ghost, it disappeared. I locked the front door behind me and ran home. My first instinct was to text Josie. She had already encountered a number of such situations. She even thought her house was haunted. She constantly sees ghosts. Unfortunately, I was hesitant to get in touch because of our awful argument. So, I did nothing. The picture I saw through the little Sanderson window had faded like a pair of faded pants by the time I completed my dinner. I persuaded myself that I had dreamed it, which is what most of you would have done. The week after that was a chore. Josie was conflicted about our fictitious friendship. She had a problem. Her behavior was strange, even for her. We worked things out throughout the course of the week, and that was that. We were friends once more, but I still wanted to advance to the next level, even though it was in private. I won't lie, she was smoking hot. Her long, flowing hair and mint green eyes were alluring. In addition, she had angelic singing abilities. I sigh. I wish she felt the same way about me as I did for her. I knew in my heart that she did, but something was preventing her from doing so. As I hurried home from school, these were my thoughts. It was mid-June by this point, and summer break was just around the corner. I got butterflies in my tummy as I got closer to the Sanderson residence. Something forced me to look up again. Inspector. I took off running. I texted Josie this time, and she was interested. She immediately came over. Admittedly, my hormones were getting in the way of my sound judgment. It was exciting to have Josie at my place. An hour would pass before my parents arrived. I was picturing what might be. I was pulled to the Sanderson residence by Josie. She desired to observe directly. However, the spirit vanished when I took her to the Sanderson residence. Josie's disdainful expression broke my heart. Her expression told me it all. I had made this up to get her attention. She was furious. Josie was experiencing night terrors, to be fair. She experienced terrible nightmares every time she went to sleep. Her health was deteriorating. I felt her drift away from me as we stood side by side, gazing out the empty window. Josie ordered me to go directly to hell, using colorful words that only a teenage girl could use. She then had me pay for the bus ride home. She apologized the following morning, but the harm had already been done. I was devastated. I detested the Sanderson home by this point. Perhaps I had actually seen the ghost. It's not as though I held such beliefs, really. It was my imagination, of course. The last day of classes seemed to drag on forever. Josie wanted to come over, which surprised and delighted me. She wanted to perform her most recent song for me. I was ecstatic. We passed the Sanderson residence on the way home. I made an effort to ignore the growing anxiety that was building in my stomach. However, it was useless. I felt quite anxious. It was a house I genuinely detested. That week, I had seen the dumb ghost nearly every day. A quick look, and it was gone. I was doubting whether I was sane. As anxious as a schoolboy, I talked endlessly in an attempt to divert Josie's attention and my own. Avoid looking at the Sanderson residence. My secret motto was that. Observe. Josie gestured toward the residence. In the window. Unwillingly, I glanced. A figure stared out the window of the bedroom. It's a female, Josie exclaimed. She appears to be about our age. Josie came to a complete halt. Her hands touched mine. Her hands were cool and soft. Mine were dirty and filthy. She drew me in. Her delicious shampoo was smelling to me. Jacintha's garden was at my feet. I turned to her, smiling with pleasure. The sun was shining. The flowers folded and floated in a beautiful pattern. We looked at the Sanderson residence gravely. The ghost let out a shriek. Then it was gone. We both trembled. Josie started crying and her sobs exploded in my ears like bombs. I lived in a mouse-quiet area. The majority of the residents were either retired boomers taking pleasure in the results of their hard work, new house owners, or people away at work. With Taylor gone, we were the only teenagers on the block. I was pulled home by Josie. She was in a panic. She was anxious because of the ghost in the window. After I prepared a huge drink of lemonade for us both, she eventually confessed. It was her. Who? The young woman in the window. She was the one. Then it made sense. Taylor? Josie's face brightened. She had emerald-like eyes. Indeed. Last summer the girl vanished. I saw her on the news and I remember her. The girl's disappearance was the subject of numerous rumors. Homeschooled and all, she was a recluse. Although there was no concrete evidence, Mr. Sanderson was the most likely culprit. Josie visited the next morning. For hours we circled the Sanderson house in an attempt to find ghosts. She held my hand while whispering, "Taylor, where are you?" Our necks were craned. The ghost has vanished. A TV flickered idly in the living room as Mr. Sanderson's gray Buick sat glumly in the one-car driveway. And gee, I added, we should exercise caution. There is a problem. Back at my place, we pouted. Josie came to her findings without hesitation. Was Taylor Sanderson's ghost actually here? Her complexion was as white as a new cloud, and her hair was jet black. Even when she was alive, she had a ghostly appearance. Why won't she show up? Josie realized as soon as she asked the question. She shows up around 3 p.m. after school. At 3 p.m., we parked in front of the Sanderson residence. The ghost did indeed appear. Her features were blurry, and I wasn't persuaded yet. One word came out of the ghost's mouth: help. I swallowed. This was not what I had anticipated. It was Josie's turn to be the con artist now. Panic overcame her worry. She desired to return home. I did everything I could to stop her from crying as I drove her home. Josie had a new tune the next day. It was dubbed Ghost in the Mirror by her. It was a tragedy. You see, Josie was certain she was the ghost by this point. She was the ghost. This might sound odd, but that's because I haven't given up all of her private information. Josie's life was gradually being destroyed by her night terrors. There was no sleep at all, despite the drug. She was tripping over glass. Josie became worse. I could see her decaying before my very eyes. Her visits become less regular as a result. The Sanderson residence frightened her as well. I was heartbroken. My relationship with the girl I loved was being ruined by the ghost in the window. Even though I understood in my heart that this was self-serving, the unpleasant emotions still surfaced. I was disturbed too. The thought of residing close to a haunted house didn't appeal to me. Josie experienced a complete breakdown. The ghost kept returning to her mind. She was admitted to the hospital shortly after being referred to a new psychiatrist. Her entire world was falling apart. On thin ice, I was tethering. I made the decision to take action. I gathered my much-needed courage and marched up to the Sanderson residence, knocking on the door. If my parents found out, they would murder me. I stood at the front door waiting for the longest minute ever. Mr. Sanderson's car was parked in the driveway, so I knew he was home. In addition, I could hear the TV yammering and furniture moving. It seems that Mr. Sanderson did not anticipate guests. I pounded again, louder this time. "Ponty," croaked the old man said. As he complained in the direction of the front entrance, his voice bounced off the walls. The door opened wide. The tallest man I had ever seen towered above me. The man was enormous, and I had never been this close to him. His face was scarred by the chaos of time, and his thinning hair was gray and silver. How could an elderly person have a little daughter? "What do you want, child?" he said in a deep voice. His gaze was piercing me. I struggled to come up with a response. It seems that I hadn't given this much thought. "May I have a cup of milk, please?" My voice was squeaky in response. It was the first thing that came to mind. My parents left me without money while they were away. I just require a small amount. I was dwarfed by Mr. Sanderson. He drummed the side of his khaki pants with his lengthy fingers. His eyes had the blackness of the cosmos. He had an old leather scent. At last he said something. "Yes. Hold on here." My face was smashed by the door. Through the bay window, I looked in. What I witnessed was startling. His cluttered walls were lined with odd jars. The jars were adorned with strange, ominous patterns that resembled spider webs. They had a voodoo appearance. The door opened as I strained to see more. Mr. Sanderson looked at me, his eyes piercing mine. "This is it." He extended his long arm and gave me a drop of milk. I was startled at his lack of thrift. I was about to ask him if everything was okay after taking the glass when the door slammed into my face. I walked home after the Sanderson house became dark. It still was dark enough out now. I filled the drain with milk. It had an odd odor, like if it had been poisoned. I told myself it was just my imagination, but I didn't believe it. I missed Josie so much. She'd be aware of what to do. Josie texted me that evening, saying, "I hope you're okay." "I'm good to go," the doctor says. "See you soon, sweetie." That night I went to bed contented, but I had a lot of scary dreams. One of them was that I was in the Sanderson home. It was completely dark. As I slipped upstairs, desperately trying not to disturb the crotchety old man, the old wooden flooring groaned beneath my feet. The narrow hallway was filled with glittering spider webs and dank dust. I felt a chill run down my spine as something breathed down my neck. I turned and saw nothing but my tiny transparent shadow. Then my hand was touched. It was freezing. "Atu bundel haspiratien?" It was freezing. I pushed my hand away trembling and I turned to face the dingy solemnity in the shop. I screamed and leapt 6 feet into the air. In the midst of the nighttime hour, the walls were muttering their cautions. The door to Taylor's room became closer and closer. I touched the door handle. I rotated it. All of a sudden, 1,000 voices said, "Go away." Like sharks, the barrage of voices began to round me. They all sang, "Go away. Get out. Get out. Get out." Something or someone sprang up out of nowhere. My throat was touched by icy fingers. I collapsed to my knees as an unseen foe choked me to death. Stung by a predatory bird, gasping for air, I woke up in a pool of damp sheets. Red prints were all over my neck. Or perhaps I was just dreaming. I was too exhausted to say anything. The following day, Josie arrived early. She appeared to have returned to her former self. Late August was the time. My parents wanted to reconnect, so they went away for the weekend. Oh no. Josie told her mother she was staying with her friend Darla, but this was a lie. This gave us the chance of a lifetime, a night by ourselves, without parents. Expectations were high, and then we heard Jane come down and set something in front of us to talk about. She performed Finding My Way Back to You, one of her most recent songs, for me. I sobbed. It was lovely. She had a worried expression. "You look like shit," she observed bluntly as she replaced her acoustic guitar's case. I finally informed her about my nightmare after some persuasion. A huge error. She was getting better, but she couldn't cope with my gory nightmare. Before long, we were both afraid. We sipped lukewarm coffees in silence while sitting stone-faced at my kitchen table. She broke the stillness by saying, "Let's sneak into the house."